Welcome back, guys. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Song, and pretty solid Fight Night card in my opinion. One of the better Apex cards. Very good main event. Did lose the co-main in Yusuf and Chikadze, but I'd still say it's a very solid card. Looks like the Njokwani Rodriguez fight is probably going to take up the co-main slot, which I'm not arguing against. I think that's a very fun fight. But regardless, I think the rest of the card is pretty solid, and there are a number of spots that I like as well in this card, so I'm not going to spend too much time on these intros. So let's dive right into the breakdowns for UFC Fight Night, Sandhagen versus Song. And in the first fight of the night, we have Loma Lookboonmee versus Denise Gomes, and Loma's the minus 260 favorite. Gomes is the plus 220 underdog, and Gomes is actually going to be making her UFC debut here, also on short notice. Loma was scheduled to go up against Diana Belbita, but I think she pulled out like a week or so ago, and Gomes is stepping in short notice. But Gomes, she is a striker, does seem to be a prototypical, Brazilian Muay Thai striker, and that she's kind of plotty. She'll come forward and throw with heat. Not quite sure how good she really is. She's fought some pretty low-level opponents, but, she's looked pretty good doing so. And again, she will be making her UFC debut on short notice. So yeah, it's kind of hard to gauge where she's really at, but she does seem to have a decent mix of power, volume, and output. Solid fighter, just a bit unproven at this stage in her career. Whereas on the other side of things, we have Loma, who is a very experienced Muay Thai striker. Decent hands, but I'd say her kicks are really her bread and butter. She'll chop at the legs. She'll go to the body. She's got good knees and elbows in the clinch. It's got some Muay Thai trips as well that I've seen her mix in. She has struggled a bit with the takedowns, and part of that's just because she's going to be the much smaller fighter, but also because she still is pretty green in terms of MMA. She still is very early in her career, despite her extensive Muay Thai experience. I feel like maybe her grappling still hasn't quite caught up yet. That said, though, I don't know if it'll be too big of an issue here. Gomez, again, is primarily a striker. Will likely oblige Loma on the feet. I do expect this to be a striking affair between the two. So I think both fighters will kind of give each other the fight they want. Gomez, she's kind of struggled off her back as well, but, I don't know if that'll, again, play too much of a factor here. And on the feet, I do tend to favor Loma. She's just the way more experienced fighter. I think she's more technical. I think that she's got better footwork and movement, potentially got the speed advantage also. And, even beyond just the Muay Thai experience for Loma, she's had more UFC experience. She's been in there with fighters like Angela Hill, Jin Yu Fry, Sam Hughes, and Lupita Godinez. And she looked pretty good, I'd say, in most of those fights. I feel like a lot of the performances have aged pretty well. I'd say minus the Godinez fight, but that was just a very bad stylistic matchup for her. A very big physical wrestler in Godinez, was able to just take her down at will and control her, but she was able to stuff takedowns from Hughes, was able to kind of, piece her up on the feet. Although, interestingly, I feel that if they rematch, I feel Hughes might actually be able to win in a rematch, but Hughes, I think, was a lot more green in that fight. But she did look decent against Fry and, put up a pretty competitive fight against Hill in her debut against a veteran in Angela Hill. So all fights and performances that have aged pretty well, in my opinion. And Loma, she is pretty young herself, I think only 26, and I do expect her to be making more improvements and rounding out the rest of her game as well. The one concern I will have on the Loma side is she is a very kick-heavy fighter. I do think she pulls away with it, but when it comes to low-level women's MMA and some of the judging lately, they tend to kind of favor maybe the headshots over the kicks, and I could see that being a bit detrimental for her here in this spot, but I just feel that there's potentially just a big enough level gap here that it might not matter. I think Loma should win somewhat soundly here. It might look close, but I do think Loma at the end of the day is going to be landing the more effective strikes here. I think she's going to be able to win it at distance. I think that she'll be able to win it in the clinch as well. And I feel that Gomes might just be a little too green here for Loma. Loma historically has struggled against fighters that are a little bigger, but Gomes is not a very big fighter, in my opinion. Not a very physical fighter either. So I don't think she'll have a big size advantage over Loma, and I think Loma's got a somewhat significant or potentially significant technical advantage and experience advantage. So I'm going to go with Loma in this spot. I'm going to go with Loma to win by decision. And moving along, we have Javid Basharat versus Tony Gravely, and Basharat's the minus 180 favorite. Gravely's the plus 155 underdog. And this is a pretty compelling matchup, in my opinion. We have Basharat, who I think is a pretty fun young prospect. Definitely has a future in the division. But with Basharat, I'd say he's somewhat well-rounded. Very light on the feet, very good kicker. Very flashy with the striking, good volume. Does seem to have some power. Does seem to have a pretty dangerous front stroke series. The cardio, I think, looks all right. I still think it's somewhat unproven, though. He's got a lot of early finishes in his career. In his last two fights, he did go a little deeper into the third round, going the distance against Giles, and on the Contender Series was able to get a third round finish. But I don't know if you could take too much from those performances, because at the end of the day, those were against, I'd say, somewhat low-level guys. And in both of those fights, he was able to largely dictate the pace. Against the Contender Series guy, the guy was just very old, man, not a good fighter. Was able to take him down and just dominate him on top. And then against Jones, Jones, a very low-output, low-pace fighter. And that fight ended up going the distance. So while I don't think it's a bad look at all, I feel overall, he still is somewhat unproven there. That said, though, I do still think Basharat's a pretty promising young fighter. But on the other side of things, we have Tony Gravely, who is, I'd say, a little more proven between the two. He's a solid wrestler with a bit of power in his hands. Boxing is solid. Nothing high level or anything, but he does put some combinations well together, decent fundamentals. And most importantly, the guy does seem to have a lot of power in his hands. He's shown he can knock guys out. But of course, his base is going to be in the wrestling. He's got a nice body lock takedown, nice single leg, nice double. Very strong, very explosive. But there are a couple concerns on the Gravely side. One is that I think his chin is a little shaky, and his cardio is just not really well suited for his style. I don't think he's got the cardio to really sustain the way he fights. A lot of his punches on the feet, lots of power, very explosive. And the same can be said about his takedowns, and all of that is just very energy consuming, right? And against lower level guys, he can kind of get away with it and just dominate him. But I'd say against more technically sound guys, guys that have slightly better cardio, they're able to, defend a little better and kind of break Gravely later in fights as he starts to slow down. And that is something he has struggled with. Gravely, all of his losses, except for one, have been inside the distance. And I feel like a lot of the losses have just been him being unable to sustain his pace and eventually getting knocked out or choked out. And I do think this is a pretty interesting matchup in that Basharat potentially poses a lot of stylistic issues with or against Gravely. I think that he's shown decent cardio, and I feel that he's potentially got the tools to make Gravely kind of wilting there later in the fight. But like I was saying before, I feel that still is somewhat unproven with Basharat. He's someone who has gotten a ton of finishes early in his career. And while he did go later in fights in his last two fights, it is against guys who weren't really pushing a pace. And Gravely generally will kind of push a pace. I'm not sure if Basharat is going to be able to sustain that sort of volume and output when he's eating big punches from Gravely early in the fight, when he's getting taken down as well. But I guess the big question here is how Basharat's going to look when he's facing some adversity, because I feel like in a lot of the fights he's had so far, he hasn't really faced a ton of adversity. And Gravely, in my opinion, is someone who will kind of bring the fight to Basharat. And, it'll be interesting to see how he's going to look, defending takedowns, how he's going to look off his back, how he's going to look when he's eating big punches. Because, he did go up against Giles, who does seem to have some power, but, he was largely able to dictate the range and kind of control the fight. And, I do think that Gravely is going to be able to land some big shots, hit some takedowns as well. So, for those reasons, I think I'm going to side with the slightly more proven fighter in Gravely, especially at dog odds where it is at. I feel like, again, Basharat could have the tools here to make this a really tough fight for Gravely, especially, later in the fight. Like, Basharat does seem to have, good enough striking to really punish Gravely if Gravely starts to slow down. And he does seem like a proficient enough grappler to find a submission if Gravely gets a little sloppy also. But ultimately, I think I'm going to side with Gravely here. I'm going to go with the more UFC-proven fighter. And, Gravely, he does have paths to victory here. I think he could potentially land something big and put Basharat out. And I think he could also mix in the wrestling also, if that's not going his way. I think he could, keep it competitive on the feet and then maybe look to put stamps on the round with, some of the takedowns he'll be hitting. And I think he could do that for 2 rounds and kind of survive for the third. So I think I got to go with Gravely in this spot, just the more proven guy, the guy with, I'd say, a pretty solid skill set, somewhat well-rounded. I got to go Gravely here. Basharat round 2, round 3 might not be a terrible look, especially if Gravely starts to slow down. But, pre-flop, I think I got to go with Gravely here, especially with where the odds are now. And it does look like more money's coming in on Basharat, so I might sit this out a little bit and then wait to see where the line goes. But official pick, I'm going to go with Gravely by decision. And moving along, we have Aspen Ladd versus Sara McMann, and Ladd is the -130 favorite. McMann is the +110 underdog. Pretty interesting fight. I think this was one that's actually been rebooked. But we'll start with Ladd first. So Ladd, she is primarily a grappler. I feel that's really where she excels, because her striking, in my opinion, is pretty horrendous. I think she's very slow on the feet, very predictable. And really, just outside of that Kunitskaya KO, where she was able to just kind of bum rush her, her striking has largely been pretty harmless. However, I will say this about Ladd. If she's able to get on top of you, she's very aggressive there. She is a pretty dangerous topside fighter. She's going to look to flurry on you and look to get you out of there. But the issue is, that's a big if in that, she's very inconsistent with getting the fight there. She hasn't shown the most urgency either. And on top of that, I don't think her wrestling's that good. So even if she wanted to, really get the fight there, she'll struggle because, I think her wrestling's pretty subpar. But, she is pretty dangerous on top. And she's going up against McMann, who is a very accredited wrestler, obviously an Olympic-level wrestler back in the day. Her boxing is actually pretty solid, in my opinion. I'd say between the two, she's probably going to be the much better striker. I think she does throw with a bit of power. She can string punches together, but ultimately she's really just looking to close the distance and get the wrestling going. And generally, McMann is pretty successful with it. Obviously she's a fantastic wrestler, but McMann does have a tendency to kind of fall apart later in fights. I think it's just a mix of her age. She's getting a little old, and the cardio. She just isn't really able to maintain that sort of pace for 3 rounds. It worked out for her in her last fight against Rosa, but I've seen on multiple occasions, she's just, falling apart later in fights, mentally collapses and ends up getting submitted. But taking a look at this matchup, I actually do favor McMann on the feet. The only thing is I don't really trust her to keep the fight there. Even if she is winning the boxing exchanges, I think just out of habit, she's eventually going to look to shoot. So I don't expect McMann to, look to keep this fight standing, even though I think she is probably going to be the superior striker in this fight. But the issue with this fight is that, McMann, I think she's going to be able to hit takedowns. She's going to have, I think, the size and the strength and the physicality over Ladd, who I really don't think belongs in this division, which brings me to another concern with Ladd. Outside of her, urgency in certain fights, it's just that she seems to be lacking the discipline, I'd say. She really shouldn't be fighting in this weight class, but she just seems to not be able to cut the weight. So she's here. So I do think that McMann is going to have success taking Ladd down, maybe holding her down a bit. But the thing is, I just can't really trust McMann to keep it together for 3 rounds. Someone like Ladd, say what you will about her, she will put the pace on you, later in fights. She has come on strong later in fights also. So for that reason alone, I just can't get to McMann here. I get it. She can hit takedowns in this spot, but between the two, I do think that Ladd is probably the better grappler. I do think she's going to be putting up resistance, and it's not going to be easy for McMann to hold her down. And, I feel she'll have success early in the fight, but in typical McMann fashion, I expect her to slow down. And I feel in the latter half of the fight, we could see Ladd potentially reverse positions. And if she's able to get on top of McMann or get into a dominant position, I could see her potentially getting a positional TKO, maybe even finding a submission. Because ultimately, I really do not trust McMann to be able to put together a solid 3-round performance. That said, I don't know if I could get to Ladd at, minus money if her win condition is to mount a late comeback, which I think she is live to do. But again, I don't know if I want to lay the juice on someone like Ladd, who has shown, to be a bit lackadaisical at times. But ultimately, we do have to make a pick here, and I think I'm going to go with Lad to win by round 3 submission. I feel, you can't really go wrong, fading McMann in round 3 or even fading McMann in general with the submission prop. McMann, in my opinion, is a bit of a stunt puller, someone who will fall apart later in a fight. And she's 41 years old too. So yeah, I can't back McMann in the spot. I just can't really trust her. Not that I can trust Lad either, but I do think that Lad potentially has a little more upside in this fight. I think McMann going to the wrestling kind of plays into the game of Lad a little bit. I think the smart thing to do for McMann, honestly, should just be to keep the fight standing and outbox Lad. I just really don't rate the striking of Lad whatsoever. But I don't think she will. I think she's going to go for takedowns and eventually tire herself out and probably get finished later in the fight, or at least drop like the latter half of the fight and lose a decision. So official pick, I'm going to go with Lad to win by round 3 submission. And in the next fight, we have Gillian Robertson versus Mariya Agapova, and Robertson's the minus 135 favorite. Agapova's the plus 115 underdog, and we'll start with the slight favorite in Robertson first. So Robertson, primarily a grappler, striking very rudimentary in my opinion, kind of hittable on the feet. But the thing with Robertson is she is pretty reliable to go to her grappling. Not a fantastic wrestler by any means, but she is pretty persistent with it. She's got a decent reactive double, does like to attack the single leg as well, but I do feel it's somewhat telegraphed. She'll also shoot from pretty far out, so I don't know if she's going to have a ton of success doing that. And Robertson, in my opinion, is someone who can get a little discouraged if she isn't able to hit the takedown. She's not someone who will kind of chain takedowns together. That said, she still is somewhat persistent with it. She'll go back into space, strike a little bit before shooting again. And despite what I've said about her, or everything I've said so far, she has actually been able to hit takedowns, at least one takedown in all of her fights, minus the Barber fight where she got knocked out somewhat early in that fight. But in all of her other UFC fights, she's actually been able to hit a takedown. And when she's on top, she's very vicious there. She's got very aggressive ground and pound. She will hunt the sub, just an absolute monster on top. Really, it's just a matter of getting it there for Robertson. But she's going to be going up against Agapova, who is a very aggressive striker on the feet. She's someone who will move forward and throw heat. Seems kind of strong for the division, at least when she is fresh. Definitely seems to have some pop in her shots. The volume seems pretty good also from her. She's got a ton of finishes on the regionals. Was able to get a number of finishes at the UFC level also. Was able to knock Cyphers out and get the club and sub on Sabina Mazo. So for sure, Agapova can crack on the feet. Her striking cardio actually seems to check out, but if she does get grappled, which leads me into my next point with Agapova, she does seem to fall off a cliff a bit. But yeah, with Agapova, I think her takedown defense is not great, and her bottom game is pretty subpar also. And when she does get grappled, her cardio seems to fall off a cliff as well. We saw in her fight against Moroz, after just one round of grappling, she just was completely cooked in there. She looked just very labored. Her striking looked far less effective, and her ability to defend that takedown, after that first round was just was horrendous. And something worth mentioning here is Agapova has actually been taken down in all of the fights that opponents have shot. So, kind of cherry picking a little bit, but opponents that have wanted to take her down have been able to take her down. Not a big sample size, but not very encouraging either. But in the fights that Agapova has been taken down in, she's lost. And like I was saying before, Robertson has been able to get takedowns in pretty much all of her fights at the UFC level, minus the Barber fight. So just based off of those stats alone, I'm leaning the Robertson side. But just stylistically, I think this is a pretty bad matchup for Agapova. Obviously, I favor Agapova on the feet. I think if this stays standing, she's going to be able to just touch Robertson up. But I think Robertson's going to be able to get a takedown here. I think she's going to be able to get her ground game going and just look to maul Agapova here. Marina Moroz, who's a boxer, was able to just go in there and out-grapple Agapova. Shannon Dobson, a bum, was able to go in there and out-grapple Agapova. And Robertson, in my opinion, is going to be the most dangerous grappler that Agapova's gone up against to date. The wrestling's still a bit lacking, but I do think that she's going to eventually hit a takedown here. And I think Agapova is going to really, really struggle. Even if Robertson isn't able to hit the takedown early, I think she can really make Agapova work in the clinch. and really just look to tire her out. Agapova, if grappling is introduced, just completely falls apart. And I just think that really all it's going to take is one takedown for Robertson to effectively win this fight. She might not win it in the first exchange. I think Agapova, that first takedown is going to come hard, right? Agapova is going to be fresh. I think she's probably the physically stronger girl in there. And, she's going to put up some resistance early in the fight, but I think Robertson's just going to work her in there. And even if Agapova doesn't get finished in that first exchange, I think it's going to do enough to slow her down. And, come that second or third round, Robertson's going to be able to hit another takedown and likely find the finish, either, positional TKO or just a submission in there. So I do like Robertson in the spot. I think official pick, I'm going to go with Robertson round 2 submission. I think she's going to really wear on Agapova early and then look for the finish in the second round once Agapova starts to slow down. So for this fight, I actually like a number of spots, actually. I really like the Robertson money line because I do think she can get it done a number of ways. I like Robertson inside the distance. I like Robertson by submission. Robertson to win in round 2. Round 3, I like the under in this fight also. Both fighters are largely under machines. I know for a while Robertson was a very prolific finisher, and same with Agapova. Agapova is kind of a kill or be killed fighter in my opinion, so I do like the under in the spot. Kind of covers the early knockout for Agapova as well. Obviously, I'm kind of screwed if Agapova wins by decision somehow, but I do think this fight likely ends inside the distance. Like I said before, Agapova is someone who will kind of look to push a pace in there. Her cardio falls apart, and just based on the stylistic dynamic, I think this is a fight that has got a pretty good chance of finishing inside the distance. Something worth noticing or mentioning here is Agapova is going to be coming in on short notice. I think Robertson was initially slated to go up against Melissa Gatto, and Gatto pulled out, and Agapova is going to be stepping in a short notice here. So I do like Robertson in this spot. I'm probably going to go pretty hard on her, which, I get it. It's women's MMA, but I feel like Robertson at this price around minus 125, minus 130, honestly seems like a steal here. I feel like Robertson should be minus 200 or so. I just think that she's going to be able to hit takedowns here and eventually find the finish. So official pick, I'm going to go with Robertson by round 2 submission. And in the next fight, we have Marc-André Barriault versus Anthony Hernandez. And Hernandez is the minus 170 favorite. Barriault is the plus 145 underdog. And we'll start with Barriault first. So Barriault, he is primarily a boxer, someone who will move forward and throw volume. He's got decent output, solid cardio. And I feel Barriault is someone who will build into fights. I feel he typically does finish fights a little stronger than he starts them. We saw in the Azaitar fight and the Dalcha fight, he was able to start to outpace him later in the fight. But I will admit those guys are on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to the cardio. He has struggled a bit against, I'd say, more technical guys that have been able to keep up in terms of the pace and the cardio. And I do think he's got a pretty tough fight here in Hernandez, who is a pretty well-rounded young fighter himself. Very slick boxing, quick hands, good movement. Seems to flow pretty well when he's striking. He's aggressive. He will look to back opponents down and flurry on him. And he's shown that in his last fight, at least, that he's been able to really push the wrestling and the grappling pace. I think he got 8 or 9 takedowns and racked up about 10 minutes of control time. And it's not like it's something that just showed up in his game either, right? He did show that in the Park fight. He was able to really aggressively go to the wrestling and eventually was able to find the submission over Park. And that leads me into my next point. His grappling is solid also. Obviously, he got that submission over Park, was able to defend submissions from Vieira, a very accredited black belt, and eventually was able to turn the tables on him and eventually find the sub against Vieira. So with Hernandez, he's just a very solid, well-rounded fighter with the cardio to back it up. Really, I'd say his only blemish on his record is a loss to Marcus Perez, which is a bit concerning because I really don't rate Marcus Perez as a fighter. But I will say this, Hernandez was still pretty young at the time, and I feel like he has maybe made some improvements to his game. The other loss was to Kevin Holland, which isn't a terrible loss in my opinion. Holland, a much bigger, more physical guy in there, and Holland, a much more proven UFC veteran at the time as well. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that Hernandez is the rightful favorite here. I feel like he's got Marc-André covered in a lot of aspects. I think that the striking could be competitive. I'd honestly go out on a limb and say that Hernandez might, have a bit more success in the striking department. I wouldn't say he's the more technical fighter, or that he's the outright better boxer by any means, but I do feel that with the threat of the takedown, he'll probably be the more effective striker between the two. A little hard to call, but I would say it's pretty competitive there at the end of the day. But I think what's really going to set him apart is going to be the wrestling and the grappling. I feel Marc-André is a bit one-dimensional as a fighter. He's largely just a striker in there, and he has struggled being taken down before. And I do think that Hernandez is going to have the cardio to match Marc-André. I feel Marc-André's really done his best work against guys with subpar cardio. He's been able to really just overwhelm him and outwork him, but I don't think that's going to happen here. I think that we see Marc-André, or not Marc-André, I see Hernandez maybe keeping it competitive on the feet, but really the difference maker is going to be the wrestling. I don't know if Marc-André is going to be able to stuff all the takedowns, and even if he is able to somehow work his way back up, I think Hernandez has got good enough cardio and grappling to chain together takedowns, to get enough control time to likely grind out a decision win this way. And we have seen Marc-André Barriault struggle a bit with the takedown defense against guys like Andrew Sanchez, Christoph Jocko, and even Jun Young Park a bit. So I do think that's a very clear path here for Hernandez. And, just beyond that, I have a hard time seeing Marc-André really, win consistently on minutes against Hernandez, especially if Hernandez is mixing in the takedowns. I don't think Marc-André is a particularly heavy hitter. I don't know if he's going to be able to finish Hernandez on the feet. I don't think he's going to be able to submit Hernandez either. So I don't think that Marc-André Barriault's got a ton of finishing upside. So his most likely path to victory here is to just outpoint Hernandez, which I think is going to be difficult if Hernandez is shooting takedowns here. So I'm going to go with Hernandez here. I'm going to go with Hernandez by decision. I don't think he's finishing Marc-André either. Marc-André Barriault is a pretty tough guy, and I don't think Hernandez is a massive power puncher. The submission could be on the table for Hernandez. I think he's the superior grappler between the two, and he will push a pace. So, if Marc-André is getting a little sloppy in there, I could see Hernandez snatching something up, especially if he's pushing the wrestling, especially if he's going to be able to get, 7-8 plus minutes of control time. So I'm going to go with Hernandez by decision, but I do think the sub is somewhat live for Hernandez. He is someone who will actually attempt submissions in fights, and if he is going to the grappling and the wrestling, he will have opportunities here. So official pick, I guess, will go with Hernandez by decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled off a submission here either. And in the next fight, we have Damon Jackson versus Pat Sabatini, and Sabatini's the minus 200 favorite. Jackson is the plus 170 underdog. Pretty intriguing matchup between two grapplers, a bit of a mirror matchup, if you will. But we'll take a look at the Jackson side first. So with Jackson, I do think he's a pretty legitimate grappler. I think he's a pretty high-level regional guy. Striking, pretty subpar. Striking defense, pretty subpar. Same with the chin also. But with Jackson, he is a pretty persistent grappler. He is generally pretty reliable to get it into the grappling realm. He's someone who's going to look to get in on you, consolidate position, kind of just grind you out. He's got a nice back tate, and most of the time he's just looking to kind of smother opponents with his grappling pressure. And, usually he's able to submit guys who just aren't able to keep up. But, if they are, he's content to kind of just ride them out to a decision. And on the other side, we have Sabatini, who is a very good grappler as well. I think between the two, the striking of Sabatini is probably a little better. I think Sabatini moves a little better on the feet. I think he's got pretty good footwork, pretty good distance striking. But with Sabatini, he is a very consistent grappler also. I think between the two, he's also maybe the better wrestler. And on top, he's very heavy, very good at controlling opponents. He is someone who will hunt for submissions. He won't force it though. And on top of that, he seems to have pretty good cardio. I think he's been able to push 3-round, grappling fights pretty well, has been able to hang in there. So on paper, this should be a pretty close fight between two grapplers. But what I think it really comes down to between the two is who's going to be the one shooting first and who's going to be the one that's going to be able to get on top. Because I do think that while both guys are pretty solid grapplers, they do struggle a little bit on bottom. I wouldn't say they're bad or anything, but with Jackson, we saw that if you're able to take him down, you can keep him on his back for extended periods. And Sabatini, to a lesser extent, we did see in the TJ Laramie fight, he got taken down early and did spend a good amount of time on his back. He was able to eventually work his way back up, but I think he did control for a good chunk of that round, and it was against Laramie, who is still pretty green, and I believe that was his UFC debut also. Whereas with someone like Jackson, if he's able to get on top of you like that, I don't think that Sabatini's going to have as easier of a time working his way back up, and honestly, I was a little surprised with Sabatini still being able to win that round against Laramie despite giving up, that much control time. But yeah, I guess he was doing enough on the feet to maybe even it out a little bit, but still not a particularly great look, especially against someone like Jackson, who I think is going to be a much more proficient grappler. But for this matchup, I think what it's really going to come down to is just the youth and the physicality of Sabatini. I think that Sabatini, he's going to be the fresher guy, the stronger guy. He's definitely going to be younger, a little less wear and tear, and overall, I just think he's a bit stronger of the two. He's going to be a bit shorter as well, a little more stocky for the division. I think that could be beneficial for him, getting in on the hips of Jackson. And I think if he's able to take Jackson down, he'll probably have a good amount of success controlling him there. I think we saw in the Bektic fight, Jackson was really just attacking subs off his back, and being a taller, lankier guy, it is a little easier to have the more compact guy on top of you controlling you. So for those reasons, I'm leaning the Sabatini side. I think that between the two, he's going to be the one having a bit more success getting the wrestling going. I think there's a bigger chance we see Sabatini win 2 rounds on top than the other way around. Sabatini kind of did give up, some position in that first round, but he was able to come back strong. So even if Jackson was able to maybe win the first round with his grappling, I feel Sabatini will be able to win the last 2. Really initiate the wrestling exchanges himself. And when it comes to Jackson, I feel like there's just a certain level of guys he's able to beat. Like you go and look at a lot of the guys he's beaten, the guys in his last 3 fights, Daniel Argueta, Camuela Kirk, Charles Rosa, really not UFC caliber fighters in my opinion. Argueta may be a UFC level fighter, but he was taking that fight on short notice, moving up a weight class, so not too much you could take from that performance. And then Camuela Kirk, in my opinion, not really a UFC fighter, and definitely not Charles Rosa at that time either. And then, in his second stint, he did make his debut second debut, I guess, against Bektic, another fight where he gave a ton of control time. Was probably on his way to losing that fight, but Bektic, a known choker, and ended up losing that fight. So I feel that Jackson, he's going to beat a lot of high-level regional guys, but there is a certain level that he's operating at, and I do think that Sabatini is above that level. I think Sabatini is a legit UFC-level guy that I think Jackson is going to put up resistance. He's going to look good in spots, but I just think that Sabatini's the better fighter. I think that Sabatini's also a little better on the feet, but probably won't matter too much. I think we see Sabatini just get enough top control time here to win a decision, potentially even find a submission. Jackson, he is someone who, he has been submitted before despite being a legit grappler. So I think that given the pace that Sabatini fights out, he may be able to find a finish, but I am leaning the decision here. I think Jackson is likely going to be able to stay safe, and we see Sabatini win a somewhat dominant decision. So give me Sabatini by decision. And in the next fight, we have Louis Cosce versus Trevin Giles. And Giles is the minus 200 favorite. Cosce's the plus 170 underdog. And this is a pretty straightforward fight, in my opinion. On one hand, we have Louis Cosce, who I think his base is in wrestling, but from all the fights that I've seen, he's content to just go in there and chuck bombs on the feet. He'll look to just blitz opponents and just throw heat. He'll load up big on shots, and he is dangerous early, if he's able to connect clean. But the thing with Cosce is, the cardio is just not good. He hasn't really been able to put together a solid 15-minute performance. I think he's actually only been outside of the first round once, and he gassed pretty hard in that fight. Emptied the tank early, I believe, against Plotnikov, and was pretty much running on fumes after the 3-minute mark. That said, though, he has showed pretty good toughness in that fight. Didn't end up getting finished until just a bit past the 2.5 round mark, so ended up surviving for an extra 10 minutes in there, even though he was dead tired. But I guess that could potentially just say a little more about Plotnikov than Cosce, if anything. Regardless, I don't have a ton of faith in this guy's cardio. It seems to be something that runs in the family. His brother Orion Cosce, pretty horrendous cardio also. So yeah, these guys just can't trust these guys, past the first round. But he is going up against Giles, who is a UFC veteran, I'd say at this point. Pretty well-rounded, pretty slick boxing on the feet, nice jab, very fluid with his movement. He can wrestle also, is a very proficient grappler. But the issue with Giles is, you just can't really trust him. He's kind of a stunt puller in my opinion. But taking a look at this matchup, I think Giles is pretty much better everywhere. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better, more proven wrestler and grappler. I think he's got slightly more proven cardio also. Giles, not someone, that's phenomenal there, but he has put together, 2-3 round fights before and, have one decision. So I think between the two, he's definitely the more proven guy and just all around the better fighter. But again, Giles just very unreliable. He is coming off of 2 knockouts, which, it is a little concerning. One of them was against Duplessis at 185, and then the other was when he first moved down to 170 against Morales. And, it's a bit concerning because Cosce, he does throw with heat early, and if he is able to connect on Giles, he could potentially put Giles out. But I just don't know how likely that is. Cosce isn't a very high-level striker. He's just winging big punches in there. He's not setting too many things up. So I feel like Giles may be able to see a lot of those shots coming, block or just parry, or even just kind of move out of the way from a lot of those shots and not be able to be hit cleanly. And I feel like after a few minutes of Cosce just winging those bombs, we see Giles eventually take over. I think the smart thing for Giles to do is just to mix in the wrestling, really use it to wear in Cosce. So I do feel that Giles, should be the favorite here. I think he really should win this fight, if I'm being honest. He really shouldn't be losing to Cosce of all people. But yeah, I don't know if I could really trust Giles at this price here. Can't really trust him to fight optimally either. But if I had to pick a side here, I'll go with Giles by round 2 knockout. I think we see him kind of weather the storm early, really make Cosce work, and I think Giles is going to be a much more dangerous fighter than someone like Palatnikov, who I think is very low level and is not UFC caliber. I think Giles is really going to be able to punish Cosce when he slows down. I think that Giles is just going to be the way better striker in there. I think he's going to be able to piece Cosce up once Cosce starts to slow down. So I'm going to go with Giles by round 2 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Cameron VanCamp versus Nikolas Motta, and Motta's the minus 235 favorite. VanCamp is the plus 200 underdog, and this is a pretty low-level fight in my opinion. 2 guys who are somewhat unproven, but we'll start with VanCamp, who honestly I don't really know what he's quite good at. It seems somewhat well-rounded in that, he can strike a bit, he could grapple a bit, but I do feel that maybe his base is in grappling because from what I have seen on the feet, his striking does seem a little stiff. He seems a bit upright. He seems to leave his chin in the air. But he's got a nice low leg kick, nice teep kick. But overall, I think his striking is pretty limited. And, he isn't actually all that reliable to push the grappling. In a few of the regional fights that I've seen, it's actually his opponents initiating some of the grappling exchanges. He'll jump on opponents, if given the opportunity, but he doesn't seem to really look to aggressively push the grappling. I definitely didn't go for it against Fiallo when I felt like it was a pretty clear gap on the feet there, right? So, maybe slightly questionable fight IQ also. So he does seem pretty content to let fights play out on the feet a lot of the time, but he does seem to have decent timing on the level change when he does decide to want to take this fight to the ground. He will look to take the back from the clinch, look for a body lock takedown if it's there. He's kind of heavy on top. He will look for submission sometimes. But overall, I haven't been really all that impressed with VanCamp. And on the other side, we have Motta, who is a pretty heavy-handed striker, very aggressive. Will put combinations together. He's got solid counter-punching. Does seem to throw with a ton of heat also. Lots of knockouts on the regionals. And even in fights that have gone to a decision, he's been able to hurt opponents. Had a really tough test in his debut against Jim Miller. I believe he was actually a favorite over Miller in that spot, or it was a really close in-line fight, I think, but ended up falling short there. Ended up being, I think, too big of a step up in competition, and ultimately got knocked out in that fight, which is potentially a concern with Motta. The chin seems to be a little suspect, obviously coming off of a knockout, but he has been hurt before on the regionals, been knocked out before, so a little concerning there because he is going up against VanCamp, who, while I don't think is a great striker, he does seem to throw with a bit of power. And VanCamp historically has fought a lot at 170, so he is going to be the much bigger guy in there. And if he could land something clean on Motta, wouldn't be surprised if he put him out or at least hurt him really, really badly there. But between the two, I do think that Motta should be the better striker. I think he might be a little quicker as well. I think VanCamp is going to be the bigger guy. He might have a bit more raw power, but in terms of the effective striking, I think Motta might just be a bit better. But I do have some concerns with VanCamp cutting down to 155. I think this is going to be his first fight down at 155 in a while. I mean, he has fought at 155 a few times before, but that was a little earlier in his career. I think it's been like maybe 3 or 4 years since he's last fought at 155. And VanCamp is a pretty big dude. I wouldn't say he's a massive 170er, but for 155, I do think he's going to be pretty big. And cutting that much weight, I feel like is going to diminish him a bit. Can't say for certain what's going to happen, but I do feel maybe his cardio might be a bit impacted. Maybe even his chin a little bit. I don't think VanCamp's got the best chin either, so I do think that the weight cut is gonna adversely affect VanCamp in the spot, and it could lead to him, eating some big shots against Motta. So I'm gonna slight lean towards Motta in the spot here. I think that he's going to be able to get the better of VanCamp in the striking exchanges. I think he's going to land heavy. I think he might even be able to hurt VanCamp, but I do think there are a number of other variables in this fight that make me not too interested in this fight. I think that with the size advantage, VanCamp, if he's able to push the grappling, he could have some success there. But again, you don't know if his cardio is going to be affected here and if he's going to be able to maintain that sort of pace. And again, VanCamp is not someone that really aggressively pursues the grappling either. So, he might just end up letting this fight play out on the feet and then end up getting caught in something. So I don't have too much trust in VanCamp in this spot. So I'm going to go with Motta. Not super confident or anything, but I'll go with Motta to win by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Daniel Zellhuber versus Trey Ogden. And Zellhuber's the minus 225 favorite. Ogden's the plus 190 underdog. And we'll start with the big favorite in Zellhuber, who's also making his UFC debut. Just a very tall, lanky volume striker, kind of like a little reminiscent of Hernandez in that just two very long, lanky guys who are very aggressive, get in your face, throw a lot of volume. Zellhuber's got a nice snapping jab, good 1-2. I like that he will go to the body. He'll blast those body kicks and has shown that he's insanely durable also. Got pieced up pretty badly early against Almeida. Was able to come back from that, win the final 2 rounds, and I feel like that's a win that aged pretty damn well considering Almeida went in there and just knocked Trezano out. So pretty impressive stuff. The cardio seems to check out from Zellhuber. I think his grappling seems okay also. Haven't seen too much from it, and from what I have seen, it's probably not his A game, but apparently he is a black belt, and when the fight does hit the ground, he does seem to know what he's doing there. He does have a pretty nice top game. I saw him snatch up a calf slicer pretty quickly on the regionals. So I do think he's a proficient grappler, at least from the limited footage that I've seen. So overall, I think Zellhuber's a pretty solid young prospect. And he's coming in against Ogden, who is predominantly a grappler. Striking is pretty limited, in my opinion. The fact that Ogden actually dropped around to Jordan Levitt in just purely striking really says all you need to know about this guy's striking. I think it was the second round against Levitt where I think the majority of that round was on the feet, and Levitt was basically able to just leg kick him at will. And while Ogden did land some decent body shots, he got volumed up in that round and really didn't have any answers for the leg kicks of Levitt. And, a lot of people probably disagreed with how that round should have been scored, but you can't argue too much. Ogden really wasn't landing too much offense, in my opinion, even though Levitt was really just throwing leg kicks. But overall, not very impressed with what I've seen from Ogden so far on the feet. And on the ground, honestly, I'm not super impressed there either. He is predominantly a grappler, but, I've seen him get reversed against low-level guys. I've seen him get his back taken, and he has actually been submitted on a number of occasions on the regionals also. So despite being a grapple-heavy fighter, I don't think he's elite there or anything. And, he puts himself in bad positions. He makes a lot of mistakes in there. So Overall, not super high on Ogden, but taking a look at this matchup, I do think that Zellhuber should definitely be the better striker. Honestly, I'd be pretty surprised if Ogden was able to hang on the feet with Zellhuber. I haven't seen too much from the bottom game of Zellhuber, but if he's got any semblance of a takedown defense or a get-up game, I do think that this should be a Zellhuber all day. Honestly, I'm not even entirely convinced that Ogden's going to be the better grappler in there. He's probably going to be the more experienced grappler, the more proven one, but I'm not entirely convinced that he's going to go in there and just ground Zellhuber and just dominate him on the mat or get enough control time. So I do like Zellhuber in the spot. I think the cardio of Zellhuber should be able to carry him through the later rounds. Also, if Ogden is able to get some of his grappling offense off. Ogden, in my opinion, doesn't have the best cardio. That second round, he pretty much took off against Levitt, and Levitt's not someone I consider to have great cardio either. So on the feet, I see Zellhuber being able to just piece Ogden up. I think he should be able to stuff takedowns. And even if he is taken down, I think he should be able to work his way back up. So I do favor Zellhuber in the spot. I think he's just the way more well-rounded fighter. And the fight does start standing, and I do favor him in the stand-up pretty heavily. So I am going to pick Zellhuber to win this fight. I think he can get it done in a number of ways, honestly. I think he could potentially get the knockout on Ogden. Ogden's never been knocked out, but he has been submitted a number of times, so maybe a club and sub is live here. I think Zellhuber can win a decision, so kind of tough to go with a method of victory here, but I'm going to go with Zellhuber. But I guess official pick, I'll go with Zellhuber by decision. I think he's able to keep it standing long enough and do enough damage on the feet to win a pretty clear decision here, so I'll go with Zellhuber by decision. And in the next fight, we have Andre Fili versus Bill Algeo. And Fili's the minus 130 favorite. Algeo's the plus 110 underdog. And we'll start with the slight favorite in Fili first. Fili, he is a pretty well-rounded fighter. A veteran, I would call him at this point. Someone who's actually been around in the UFC for a decent amount of time now. He's fought some good guys. Has lost a number of fights as well. So I would consider him a bit of a journeyman also. But I still think he's a pretty solid fighter, a pretty good litmus test for a lot of guys in the division. But as far as what Fili does, I think he's, again, pretty well-rounded. He's got a decent striking, kind of meat and potatoes, but it is pretty effective. He's got a nice kick to the body and head that he likes to throw. He's capable of mixing in the wrestling also. Generally, he prefers to strike, but I do think it's something that he has in his back pocket. Would actually like to see him go to it a bit more in this fight because he is going up against Algeo, who is more of a volume striker. The guy is someone who will move forward and just have a crazy work rate. He's someone who's shown he could carry that pace for 3 rounds. He's shown incredible durability, really good submission defense, obviously coming off of that win against Gilbert Burns where, he wasn't deep in that submission, but was able to fight through it and eventually get Burns out of there. But even before, or even beyond that, the guy just gets into scraps. He takes a lot of damage, but is able to continue to go forward and throw volume. He's been in there with some pretty solid guys as well, like Ramos and Lamas in his debut. Even Lugnane, who is off in, I think, either PFL or Bellator doing good things. But yeah, he's been in there with some solid guys. The issue that I kind of have with Algeo is, one, his takedown defense is pretty spotty. He does have a tendency to give his back when he gets up also. He does a good job of working his way back up, but again, just not a great look in terms of being able to give up takedowns easily. It's just, I don't know if the judges really like that, especially in close striking affairs. And secondly, Algeo is pretty hittable for as much volume as he throws. He does take a lot of damage also, so his fights end up being pretty close, not a ton of margins in his victories. Well, at least his victories that go to a decision or fights that go to a decision in general. He's been able to do pretty well against guys that have slowed down, guys that haven't quite been able to keep up with him, but fighters that have been usually fight him pretty competitively, and I do think that's what happens in this fight. I think Fili's got pretty decent cardio. He's a pretty solid striker as well. So on the feet, I expect this to be a pretty competitive fight standing. I think Algeo will have the volume, but I think Fili, maybe landing a bit heavier. But I think what's really going to put him over the edge here is going to be the wrestling. In a close striking affair, I think that a takedown could potentially just seal the round. And, Fili isn't someone that I would trust too much to fight optimally. There are times when He'd have a much easier fight if he was hitting takedowns where he kind of just avoided them. So, the fight IQ I think is a little questionable from Fili, but I do think that him coming into this fight, not having a win in over 2 years, I expect him to maybe mix it up a little bit more and really just try and get the win here. And I do think it's a very winnable fight for Fili. Like I've saying before, should be pretty close in terms of the striking. I edge Algeo in terms of the volume, but he is pretty hittable, and Fili does hit moderately hard, so I don't see Algeo being able to just overwhelm Fili. And I think if Fili is able to hit some opportune takedowns, it might be enough for him to just secure the rounds that way. And as far as some of the other intangibles, Fili, of course, is going to be the younger fighter, actually, but he's actually had more UFC experience, so I think that's kind of works in his favor. So, for all those reasons, I'm going to go with Fili. Fili by decision. I think it's going to be a pretty close one, but at the end of the day, I think what really gets it done is going to be the wrestling upside for Fili. So give me Fili by decision. And in the next fight, we have Joe Pyfer versus Alen Amedovski. And Pfeiffer's the minus 410 favorite. Amedovski's the plus 310 underdog. And I think this is a pretty straightforward fight. Not too much to say here. Amedovski, in my opinion, not a very good fighter. Pretty much someone who's just got some power in his hands, a bit of a brawler. Very herky-jerky movement on the feet. He's going to look to just wing big bombs in there and brawl with opponents. He's had a ton of success with it on the regionals, but, that's not really going to fly at the UFC level, in my opinion. He tried to do that against John Phillips and paid for it. And then he gets completely out-grappled by Jotko and then gets knocked down and submitted by Joseph Holmes in his return fight after taking about a couple years off. But yeah, just overall, I'm just not a huge fan of his game. I think he's extremely one-dimensional, pretty much knockout or bust. He's got poor takedown defense, poor defensive grappling. I've seen him taken down and controlled on the regionals also. Just a pretty bad and pretty limited fighter, in my opinion. On top of that, he didn't look good whatsoever in his return fight. Yeah, he looked kind of out of shape, looked a little slow in there also. So, yeah, I don't think Amedovski's really good. But he's going up against Pyfer, who is going to be making his UFC debut. Honestly, probably could have made it, after his first Dana White Contender Series fight. Unfortunately, broke his arm, and we ended up with Dustin Stoltzfus instead. But anyways, with Pyfer, he is a pretty well-rounded guy. He seems to have some power in his hands. A little plotty, though, but, he has been able to knock guys out. He can grapple, and he's quite physical as well. Seems to have a pretty heavy top game. So I think this is a pretty straightforward matchup. I think there's a pretty clear path here in the grappling for Pyfer. I mean, he could potentially knock Amedovski outstanding, but I feel he could just take him down and kind of just smash him on top. Amedovski's just shown a horrendous top game or bottom game. He doesn't seem to know what he's doing on bottom. So Pyfer should have a pretty massive edge there. Pyfer, he could probably, again, knock Amedovski out, but you'd be playing with fire a little bit there because Amedovski does have a bit of power. So I think that the easiest path here is to just take him down and just dominate him there. So yeah, pretty straightforward. I'm going to go with Pyfer here to win by round one knockout. I think he's able to just take Amedovski down and just smash him. Not sure if I'm willing to lay the minus 400, though, because Pyfer, he is making his debut against someone who's got power in Amedovski, and Pyfer just fought pretty recently, too, so he's making a somewhat quick turnaround. So a little hesitant to lay the minus 400 on him, but I do think you should be able to come in here and make pretty quick work of Amedovski, who I really don't think is UFC caliber. I think Amedovski likely loses this fight and gets cut, so give me Pyfer here. Give me Pyfer by round one TKO. And moving along, we have Tanner Boser versus Rodrigo Nascimento, and Boser's the minus 205 favorite. Nascimento's the plus 175 underdog, and we have a pretty intriguing matchup here between a striker in Boser and a grappler in Rodrigo Nascimento. And we'll start with Boser first, who is a pretty agile heavyweight, if I'm being honest. He seems to move pretty well there. Seems pretty quick also. Realistically, could probably make light heavyweight, but even then, he would be a bit on the bigger end. But as far as a heavyweight goes, I would say he's a bit undersized. That said, though, he should have better mobility than most heavyweights in the division here. He's got solid striking, good cardio. I think the volume is good, too. But where Boser's really struggled has been in the grappling. His takedown defense isn't actually too bad, but if you take him down, he really does seem to struggle off his back. He struggles working his way back up, and, he can get stuck on his back for extended periods. It's happened to him on the regionals, and it happened again versus Latifi, and regardless of how you felt that fight should have been scored, it was still a very, I guess, concerning look to have Boser give up, significant control time. And Latifi, while he is a pretty good wrestler, Latifi is pretty undersized as a heavyweight, and I'd say Latifi's pretty undersized for a light heavyweight also. So yeah, him giving up those takedowns and the control time to Latifi, not a particularly great look in my opinion. And even against OSP, who again is a light heavyweight, even OSP was able to take Boser down and kind of control him for a little bit. If it wasn't for a pretty egregious fence grab by Boser, he probably would have given up even more control time, but the fence grab did happen. He was able to work his way back up and eventually get the knockout, but I do think that that's a part of Boser's game that hasn't really been shored up. It was there a long time ago on the regionals, and it's kind of shown itself again, so I feel that it'll probably just be something that is going to be a part of him for the rest of his career. He might work on his takedown defense a little bit. It may improve a little bit, but I do think that this is a hole in his game that's probably going to be there, at least going into this fight. And it is interesting because he's going up against Nascimento, who is a grappler. The striking from Nascimento pretty rudimentary in my opinion. He will move forward and throw heat, and he'll load up big on shots, but I feel like sometimes it's just a means for him to get the fight into the clinch, and from there he does seem to have a nice body lock trip, but beyond that he hasn't shown too much takedown upside. He hasn't really had to show it. He's fought some pretty low-level guys that have kind of just toppled over guys that don't have the best cardio, so he hasn't really had to proactively wrestle too much in a lot of these fights. But overall, I do think that while Nascimento is still kind of improving, I do think he's a somewhat capable heavyweight grappler. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's somewhat binary in that Boser should clearly be the better striker. I think he'd likely just be able to piece Nascimento up over the course of 15 minutes if it was a striking affair. But obviously, Boser or Nascimento is going to look to hit takedowns there. And on the mat, I do actually favor Nascimento by a decent margin. I just haven't seen enough from Boser in terms of his ground game to make me really confident in him being able to stuff takedowns and being able to work his way back up. That said, though, I do think Boser should still be the favorite here. Just not this big of a favorite. At the end of the day, the fight does start on the feet. Boser, he is going to be the better striker. He's got a lot more experience regionally and at the UFC level. He's been in there with better opponents. So I do think he should be the rightful favorite, but I just don't think you could really lay the minus 200 on him, especially when he's got this big of a hole in his game that can be exploited by someone like Nascimento, who likely is going to try to take advantage. I think there's going to be a big enough gap on the feet that Nascimento's not really going to entertain the striking too much. Maybe he'll kind of strike with Boser a little bit just to set up the takedowns to work his way into the clinch. But I don't see him looking to strike with Boser for extended periods. But, if he doesn't get this fight to the ground, obviously he's going to be in a ton of trouble. I don't really rate the striking of Nascimento that much. I think his chin isn't the greatest at heavyweight. I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but he did get knocked out by Daukaus, and I believe Barriault was able to kind of sting him a bit and hurt him. So overall, I don't think Nascimento's got a bad chin or anything. I just don't think that it's particularly great at the heavyweight division. So if it's a fight that ends up playing out for extended periods on the feet, I do think Nascimento could be in a bit of trouble. But ultimately, I do see Nascimento being able to hit takedowns here and likely racking up enough control time to win a decision victory here. So as far as a pick goes, I am going to go with Nascimento here to win by decision. I do think it's a little risky of a play here just because Nascimento is still pretty unproven. I don't think he's really beaten anyone good. So Boser is definitely going to be the toughest test for him, but I do think that Nascimento's got a solid skill set as far as heavyweight goes, and I think it's enough here for him to get it done. So give me Nascimento by decision. And in the next fight, we have Gregory Rodriguez versus Chidi Njokwani, and Rodriguez is this is actually a pick'em fight, so it's minus 110 on both sides. And rightfully so, right? This is a very compelling matchup. Probably one of the more hotly debated fights for this week. Just a very tough fight to break down, but we'll do it anyways here. So we'll start with Rodriguez. A very well-rounded mixed martial artist, in my opinion. Very slick boxing on the feet, hits very hard. Footwork not particularly great, is a little plotty, but he does have power in his hands. He is someone who will move forward, and he does throw with some heat. He's been able to get knockouts over guys like Marquez and Park, two guys who I consider to be pretty durable. And on top of that, Rodriguez, he can wrestle. He's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so he can grapple as well. Very big for the division, very physical. Just a very solid, well-rounded fighter. But there are some, concerns on the Rodriguez side because of his size and his strength. The cardio is not great on his end. And his chin is a little suspect. He has been knocked out before, and he has been rocked. And on the other side, we have Chidi Njokwani, who is a pretty solid striker himself. Does a decent job of fighting long and using his length. He's got a good jab, 1-2. He does have power in his hands also. In his 2 UFC fights, he has gotten 2 knockouts, and against 2 pretty tough guys in Marc-André Barriault and Dusko Todorovic also. Very strong in the clinch, nasty knees there. Very good attritional work from Chidi. He'll look to attack the body. He'll throw knees to the body also. I do think that Chidi's got a pretty dangerous clinch game. Obviously was able to get the knockout win over Todorovic. That was from an elbow in the clinch. Just slammed it into the side of his head and put him out. So very dangerous striker in Njokwani. But like Rodriguez, Njokwani does struggle a bit with the cardio, especially when he's being grappled. So it does make this a very interesting fight. I think really just comes down to the cardio dynamic between the two. I think both guys have, somewhat subpar cardio, and ultimately I think will come down to who's going to have a little bit more in the tank in the third round if it gets there. But yeah, this should be a pretty fun fight. Both guys, very fun styles. And again, just a very compelling matchup in that on the feet, it should be competitive. Rodriguez, he does have, pretty slick boxing in my opinion, but I do favor Chidi at distance. I think he's got better tools. He's going to be able to fight a little longer. He's got a slightly longer reach. He's going to be able to fight behind the jab. I think his footwork's a little better. I think he's got a better kicking game also. And, in the clinch, I do favor Chidi also. But at distance, I do like the jab and the 1-2 from Chidi. I do favor G-Rod in boxing range, but I just don't know how much the fight will take place there. So overall on the feet, I do favor Chidi a little bit more. But that said, Rodriguez, in my opinion, is going to be the more well-rounded fighter. He's got a bit more wrestling upside. He's the better grappler. And historically, that is where Chidi has struggled. A number of his losses have come from him being taken down and just smothered. But something worth considering here is, while Rodriguez is the better wrestler and grappler, I don't think he's got the cardio to really sustain a heavy wrestling or grappling pace. I mean, the guy damn near gassed himself out pushing a grappling pace against Park. Was able to pull off the victory there, but it wasn't looking good after a round of pretty heavy grappling. And then against Armen Petrosian, in theory, he should have had a wrestling and grappling edge there, but he wasn't really able to go to it because, Armen, he was defending pretty well, but, Rodriguez also just didn't have the cardio to aggressively pursue the takedowns and really push the grappling. So in theory, while Rodriguez should have the grappling edge here, I just don't know if he's going to be able to consistently go to it. I don't think he's going to have more than a round or so of success there. That said, there are some caveats here. He might only need 1 round of success. He might just be able to take Chidi down and submit him there. And, the thing with Chidi is he does have pretty subpar cardio, and there is a chance maybe he gasses out, a little quicker than Rodriguez, and we see Rodriguez maybe hit a takedown late in fight and potentially seal the round that way. So just a fight that is very tricky in that regard, right? Because like I was saying before, I do think that if this fight somehow gets to the third round, it could be 1-1 there. And it'll just come down to, who's going to be able to dig a little deeper. Maybe Rodriguez has a little more left in the tank. He's able to get that takedown and is able to consolidate, control time and win the round that way. Or maybe he doesn't have enough strength and energy to convert that takedown. And we see Chidi just kind of eke away with a decision into the third round. He's able to kind of just pick at Rodriguez a bit, land some of the better shots while Rodriguez starts to slow down. So I guess it just comes down to who you think is going to have the cardio in the third round to pull off the win there. Both guys, I think, are pretty dangerous early. I think Chidi can definitely get the knockout early, especially over Rodriguez, who, he's, I'd say, a little plotty and a little hittable. And Chidi, he does have some power in his hands. And I do think that Rodriguez, when he's fresh, he could probably hit a takedown and find the submission early. Chidi, I don't think has got the best ground game. So I do think we can see it potentially an early finish, but I do think that if they're able to get past that first round and a half, I think both guys may slow down enough where the finish is going to be a bit harder to come by, and we see it go to a decision. But as far as an official pick for this fight, I think I'm going to lean the Chidi side here, not with a ton of conviction. I do think this is a rightfully aligned fight at about 50-50, because I do think both guys have very clear paths to victory here. I think both guys have strengths that they can use to take advantage of the other. I think both guys have weaknesses that can be exploited also. But I think what it really comes down to is the fight does start standing, and I do favor Chidi. At distance, I favor him in the clinch. He does solid attritional work. I could really see the body work get to Rodriguez, especially later in the fight. Chidi's also going to be the more experienced fighter. He's racked up a ton of regional experience. I'd say he's the more complete fighter at this point, but I do think that Rodriguez may have a little more upside in that he's a little younger, and I'd say his overall game is still developing. We're seeing a few wrinkles to his game every single time, so I do think Rodriguez has a little more upside in that regard, so could potentially just be a wash there. But ultimately, I think I have to side with Chidi because, again, I do favor striking a little bit more, and the fight does start standing, and I guess I just don't really trust Rodriguez enough here to really implement the grappling enough for him to win. So I think the fight will play out enough on the feet for Chidi to either have big moments and win a decision there or just get the knockout. So I'm going to go with Chidi. I think he gets it done by decision. Wouldn't be surprised if he got the knockout, but if he doesn't get the knockout early, I could see this being a pretty sloppy affair going late, and I could see him just eking out a somewhat close decision here. So I'm going to go with Chidi by decision. And in the main event, we have Song Yadong versus Corey Sandhagen. And Sandhagen's the minus 205 favorite. Song Yadong's the plus 175 underdog. And this should be a really fun fight, honestly, between two very high-level strikers. But we'll start with Song Yadong first, the underdog. So with Yadong, like I was saying, he is mainly a striker, very quick hands, likes to blitz and put combinations together. He has shown pretty good power as well. The output is solid. I think he can go 3 hard rounds in the striking, which, I do feel Song's a pretty interesting fighter in that his power to cardio ratio is definitely above average. Like, I'd say he has pretty good cardio for how hard he throws. I don't think he's the most devastating puncher in the division, but he does throw with heat, don't get me wrong, and he does seem to pack a punch, but I feel like a lot of his knockouts have been over guys with maybe average or subpar durability. But against, I'd say, the upper tier guys, he may struggle a bit finding the knockout. That said, he does throw with, he does throw with heat for sure. Don't get that twisted. But he still has the volume to win minutes, right? He's not someone who's reliant on just landing the knockout either. So I do feel that, in terms of cardio and power, he is, I'd say, above average. And in terms of his cardio, I feel like Song's really only slowed down against guys that have been able to mix in the grappling in the clinch work, right? I think good examples are the Stamen fight and the Vera fight. So obviously the Stamen fight, Stamen's a very good wrestler, was able to hit takedowns on Song, and Song was looking fatigued later in fights, but that was against a very good wrestler in Stamen, and that was pretty early in Song's career too, right? I think that was like the first legit wrestler that Song had gone up against, and then against Vera, he was slowing down a bit. Vera was kind of working him a bit in the clinch, and we all know Vera's a really good attritional fighter, but something worth mentioning in that fight is that was a short notice fight, and say what you will about the fight and how you scored it. I feel like it was a very competitive affair. Not a robbery by any means. I do think I scored it for Song, but regardless, I do think that was a solid performance, a fight that has aged pretty well considering the run that Vera is on now. And again, that fight did happen on pretty short notice. So, all things considered, I thought it was a solid performance. And in the other fights for Song that have gone the distance, he's actually looked decent. Cardio-wise, that is. I'm looking at the Casey Kenny fight and the Kyler Phillips fight. The Kyler Phillips fight, Song did lose, but he was actually starting to come on a bit in that third round, and that was the round he did win against Phillips. And Phillips was mixing in the wrestling also, so I'd say pretty good look for Song there. And then against Casey Kenny, who, is kind of known for his cardio and pace, Song was able to keep up with him, and I'd say win pretty clearly. Not really sure why that was a split, but pretty solid performance there. And to top it all off, Song also's got tremendous durability. Obviously, he ate that head kick from Phillips, was able to continue to fight beyond that. And he did also go the distance with Vera, who, Vera's out here punting guys' heads off, so another win that's aged pretty well for him. So yeah, I think Song Yadong's a solid fighter, and he's going up against, I'd say, an elite striker in Sandhagen, who, the guy's got great footwork, really good feints, really good head movement. He's able to fight in both stances. He's got really good at cutting angles and just does a really good job of mixing it up on the feet. He'll attack all three levels. Just overall a very dynamic striker. He's able to time that flying knee very well. Obviously hit it in the Edgar fight, but he has landed it in other fights as well, and he will look for it probably in this fight. The cardio was solid. He's shown that he can go 5 rounds in the striking, and he does have 5-round experience so far. I think he's gone 5 rounds with TJ Dillashaw and with Peter Yan, so very high-level guys he's been with, in there with. The biggest weakness for Sandhagen probably is takedown defense. He gives up a lot of takedowns, but, he is good in scrambles, but it's just not particularly a good look when, you're getting repeatedly taken down. Even if you're able to scramble out of it. It has cost him some fights, but I don't think it'll be too big of an issue here. I think this is going to be a striking affair. And on the feet, I actually think it's going to be pretty competitive. When they first announced the fight, I thought Sandhagen would clearly be the side. I thought he'd just be the way more technical fighter. He'll go in there and just pick Song apart and win maybe a pretty comfortable decision. But after digging into it a little bit more, I'm not as certain anymore. I do think that Sandhagen should be the rightful favorite for a number of reasons. I'll list them right now. I think that between the two, Sandhagen is going to be the more technical fighter. I think he's got better footwork, distance management, and overall just better volume. I think he's the more dynamic striker. He's really good at just mixing it up, whereas Song is, I'd say a little more traditional and more fundamental with his, boxing combinations. On top of that, Sandhagen is going to be the taller and longer guy with more 5-round experience, and I'd say just slightly better experience in general. He's fought, I'd say, slightly better competition. Song Yadong's fought some really respectable guys in there as well, but I think Sandhagen edges it. He's been in there with guys like Petr Yan and Dillashaw and Moraes and Sterling and Assunção and Lineker. So he's been doing it a little longer against higher-level guys, but, Song Yadong's been in there with some good guys too, so not to completely discredit what he's done, but overall I do slightly lean Sandhagen in terms of just the experience advantage. So you combine all those things, and I can understand how people come to the conclusion that Sandhagen should be minus 200 favorite, maybe even a bigger favorite. But I think stylistically this is going to be just a very competitive matchup. I can definitely see Song give Sandhagen some trouble on the feet. And the reason I say that is outside of a Sandhagen jump knee or like a spinning wheel kick or something, I really don't think that Sandhagen is the most dangerous fighter. He's got the size and the volume, but I really don't think he's got a ton of power. He doesn't really play the outside game too much either. He's much more like in your face, volume kind of guy, kind of similar to Max Holloway. I'd say he's a little closer to Max Holloway than he is like a Sean O'Malley or even like a Adesanya, right? So he's someone that's going to get in your face and throw volume and look to overwhelm you. And in doing so, he does leave openings, right? And I feel like that's something that Song could potentially deal with. Like I've said before, Song, very durable, someone who is willing to take damage, to deal damage. And I feel like if Song is able to bite down and look to trade with Sandhagen, he can have a lot of success there. And I feel that between the two, Song's going to be the one landing the much harder strikes. And historically, I feel that strikers, and I say strikers because, I think Sandhagen will struggle against grapplers, but the strikers that have given Sandhagen, I guess, the most trouble are these tough, heavy hitters that have been able to take his shots and return fire. Guys like Lineker and even Petr Yan. These guys, they've been able to get in front of Sandhagen and return with some very heavy shots. Obviously, these guys are much different fighters stylistically from Song Yadong, but I do feel that Song Yadong kind of fits that prototype a little bit. And it's interesting, right? if we're looking at both fighters in a vacuum, I definitely favor Sandhagen, but I do think that styles make fights, and I do think that stylistically this can be a very competitive fight. Like, if we think about it, over the course of 5 rounds, I can see both guys landing 100 plus significant strikes. Maybe give Sandhagen maybe like a 10, 15, 20, significant strike differential, but I can see rounds being swung based off of the power and the optics of it. I think that, maybe the judges will favor some of the power shots that Song is landing a little bit more, and I think that could be enough for Song to potentially win a decision here. But look, like I was saying before, I do think that Sandhagen should be the rightful favorite. He's just had a lot more experience, and in terms of just the measurables, he has a lot of the advantages, but just stylistically, I really feel this should be a really, really close fight. I really don't think Sandhagen's going to just dominate Song Yadong on the feet or anything. And last thing, I will say this, right? I feel like there is a bit of a blueprint out on how to beat Sandhagen already. Obviously, the best thing to do against him is just to wrestle and grapple him. That's one of his biggest holes, but obviously Song Yadong, not much of a grappler, so I don't really expect him to take the fight to the ground. I mean, it could be something he can mix in to close out rounds, and I feel like he has a little bit of upside in that regard, but not banking on it. But in terms of just on the feet, what you could do to really slow down the striking and the pace of someone like Sandhagen, who's just an absolute pace machine, is to really look to do attritional work, right? Really chop at the legs, really dig to the body. I think guys like Jan and even Lineker, had a lot of success doing. And I mentioned those two fights repeatedly because I do feel that those guys fought Sandhagen the most competitively on the feet. Jan outright beat Sandhagen, and Lineker, I'd say, put up a very competitive fight, arguably won that fight. But what both guys did really well was attack the body of Sandhagen. Anytime Sandhagen was switching to southpaw, Jan was just blasting into the body. Lineker just was digging to the body consistently too, and I think especially in a 5-rounder, it does some really good things, right? I think chopping to the legs, you limit the mobility a little bit. Someone like Sandhagen, very nimble on the feet. You want to start to limit the mobility, soon and have that build up later in fights. And going to the body, I think, is something that will pay dividends later in fights also, especially in a 5-rounder. Against someone like Sandhagen, who's got phenomenal cardio. You want to do things to really slow him down and kind of even the playing field a little bit. So I feel like those are just a couple really easy things Song can do to mix into his game, without fundamentally changing his style, that he could do to really even the playing field. But I'm actually not going to bank on it too hard because he's training out of Team Alpha Male, which I think is a pretty shitty game planning camp, in my opinion. I think while they have a lot of bodies and they do go hard there, I don't think they do too much to prep fighters in terms of matchups. I don't think they prep their fighters to fight optimally in there. So, I'm not going to bank on it. But I do think that even if Song Yadong goes in there and fights like he typically does, he can make this a very competitive fight. So, official pick, I'm going to go with Song Yadong to pull off the upset. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. People might even call robbery on it, but I do think it's one of those fights that might go to a split decision. So, official pick, I'm going to go with Song Yadong. Song Yadong to win by split decision. And that'll do it for the breakdowns for this card, which will bring us right into the recap for the previous event, UFC 279, Diaz versus Ferguson. And a pretty crazy card. Obviously, a lot of drama around it. But in terms of bets and picks, didn't do too hot. Feel like we did get shafted a little bit in a couple of spots, but not going to complain too much. But yeah, kicking off the card, we had Darian Weeks, Johan Lainez. I was on the weak side, but the only action I had was just Weeks in round 2 and round 3. Obviously, just a bit of a fade on the cardio of Lainez, but Weeks just not really the guy to really push the pace and just not really a dangerous fighter. Never really put Lainez in danger, and can't say I really agree with the decision there. I thought Weeks did enough to win 2 rounds, but obviously judging, didn't agree with that, and the judging, in my opinion, was a little weak tonight. But moving along, Melissa Martinez, Elise Reed. Very close fight. Did end up taking a shot on Reed there. Just felt that, big step up in competition for Martinez. Long layoff against a somewhat proven veteran in Reed, at plus money. Just to play on the numbers there. Was considering Reed by decision, but I'd already played the money line. And, in what would likely be a mainly striking affair between two fighters that, will throw heavy in there. decided to just play it safe and just stick to the money line. Not a card I was too confident overall, so didn't go too hard on any of the plays in particular. But moving along, Chad and Helliger, Alateng, Haley. Didn't really have any action. I did have Haley Alateng in a long shot parlay, but it didn't really cash. It didn't really matter. But Haley, fought a pretty composed game plan. Won, I'd say pretty clearly there, but still a lot of concerns on his side. The volume definitely an issue. Obviously didn't go to the wrestling again either. Not that he had to, but I know he did fight really composed in there, but it was against Chad Henheliger, and I don't know. I just not a huge fan of his style so far. He put on a solid performance, but definitely not someone I'm running to bet going forward. But moving along, Norma Dumont, Danielle Wolf, and I did bet Wolf in this spot, and it wasn't a good bet because Wolf looked pretty terrible in there. It was just a play on the numbers. I thought she'd be a little more competitive in the striking, but I mean she was getting pieced up on the feet too. So not much else to say there. Bad bet. Daniel Wolf is terrible. We move along. Jake Collier, Chris Barnett. So pretty crazy fight. Didn't end up having any action on it. Just couldn't really bring myself to trust Collier in this spot, especially at minus 400. And I mean, he showed exactly why. Technically he's the better fighter, more experienced. I don't really rate Barnett much, but it definitely seemed like Collier went in there and was overlooking Barnett. He came out swinging, came out hot. Didn't respect anything from Barnett and ended up, I guess, tiring himself out a little bit. Ended up shooting a pretty lazy, sloppy shot and got his back taken, mounted, and pounded out. But moving along, Dennis Tululin, Jamie Pickett. So I was on the Pickett side. I bet him for the small amount too. Pretty horrendous bet. Really not sure what else to say here. I mean, Pickett's just not a good fighter. Really shouldn't have backed him. The guy just cannot defend elbows for some reason. He's getting the side of his head elbowed off. That happened in the Jordan Wright fight too, where he was just committing to the takedown and ended up eating like 12 elbows to the side of the head and ended up getting finished also. So horrendous bet. We move along. Jilton Almeida, Anton Turkali did not end up having any action on this fight either. Was somewhat impressed with how Turkali looked early, all things considered, right? I feel like he defended somewhat well, stayed composed in there. But, when it came down, it was just the physicality, and that Almeida's just, I think, a much slicker grappler, right? I think once he started raining down the ground and pound and opening Turkali up in the grappling exchanges, he was able to eventually find the finish, eventually find the submission. Decent performance from Turkali coming in short notice against a beast like Almeida, but, very impressive performance for Almeida as well. But moving along, Julian Erosa, Hakeem Dawodu, I mean, talk about performing to your opponent's level. Erosa definitely stepped up big in there. Looked really good. Wasn't expecting him to largely dominate Dawodu. I mean, coming off of that Peterson performance, I thought he'd get pieced up by Dawodu, but I guess that just goes to show you that styles really do make fights. Peterson, someone who is willing to get into a dogfight, someone who is content to kind of go into the fire with you, right? Whereas with Dawodu, he does generally prefer a clean striking affair when he's able to dictate the pace, but Erosa didn't let him do that. Erosa just got in his face and was just throwing bombs in there, was able to mix in the grappling also. But Dawodu just wasn't able to keep Erosa off of him, and Erosa was able to kind of just smother him with the pace. And the chin of Dawodu definitely letting him down a little bit here. Obviously, he didn't get knocked out or anything, but he did get hurt enough where I feel like that made him a little more gun-shy, made him a little less willing to get into wild exchanges with Erosa. Anyways, Erosa's just a very underrated fighter, very undervalued. I mean, if you've been betting Erosa as an underdog, you've probably made a ton of money, and I feel like the secret's probably going to be out on him soon. I feel like the market's probably going to overcorrect. His next fight, he might end up being a bit of a favorite or, close to pick him, and I feel like that might be a chance to potentially, zigzag there a little bit. It really will come down to the matchup, but I feel like people are going to start catching on to Erosa as a very valuable underdog. But overall, a very solid performance by Erosa. Just a very underrated, very fun fighter. Kind of glad he got the win there. But moving along into the main card, Johnny Walker, Ion Kudalaba. I did bet Walker in this spot. Missed out on a ton of value. Didn't expect money to be pouring in on Kudalaba, but I just did not trust Kudalaba in this spot. I mean, he's just a bit of a head case. And beyond that, I felt that in this matchup, he's going to be giving up size. And Kudalaba historically has struggled against, bigger guys holding them down, especially against guys with like decent grappling, right? And I do feel Walker's a decent grappler. A lot of people surprised he was able to pull off the submission, but like I was saying, Walker does have, I'd say, pretty decent grappling, at least compared to Kudalaba, and he was able to eventually pull off the submission here. I did end up betting a small amount on the fight goes the distance just because, well, I did favor this fight to end early. I thought that, if there was no finish, it'd be one of those just really sloppy fights, and obviously that didn't cash, but I was able to cash the Johnny Walker ticket. And moving along, Irene Aldana, Macy Chiasson, and I did bet Chiasson in this spot. Got a ton of closing line value, but ultimately did not cash. Not too upset with the bet, though. I do feel that Chiasson was picking up momentum in the fight. I think she won round 2, lost round 1, and that third round, I feel like she could potentially have won. She got the takedown, but I feel like she made a bit of a mistake standing back up. I think she could have consolidated a bit more control time and really worked the clock that way. But instead, stands up and gets upkicked by a fucking liver shot. So I'm not sure how often that happens, but I do feel that, had that not happened, we could have seen a much more competitive fight and potentially even a win for Chiasson. So while we did get hit with a bit of variance here, I'm not too upset with the bet here. But moving along, we had the 3 fights that ended up getting switched around a bit, and I am going to go full tinfoil hat here before we get any further into the recaps. I do think there's a decent chance the UFC may have orchestrated the events a little bit to get the matchups that we did. I mean, the stats guys, they probably crunched the numbers and did the projections, and it looked like it was going to do less buys than a Nunez card, and they had to shake it up. Like, between the soft-ass presser cancellation where, after looking at the footage, it looked like just a very mild exchange. Definitely a bit blown up, and Khamzat's post-fight interview where he kind of let slip that the doctor had told him to stop cutting. They told him it was okay to eat and drink because he knew he was fighting that guy, and Kevin Holland, right? I believe he was referencing Holland in his interview. Definitely reeks of the UFC drumming up a bit of drama to generate a bit of intrigue. Not complaining though, because seeing how the fights played out, it could have been it's a far more depressing card. Anyways, you heard it here first, guys. But yeah, back to the recaps here. Got a little sidetracked. We had Li Jingliang versus Daniel Rodriguez. So the first fight that did get shaken up, Li definitely getting shafted a little bit here, fighting a much bigger Rodriguez. Didn't have to cut as much weight. But Li, he looked pretty sharp, and I did bet him in this spot. Li, in my opinion, is a pretty tricky, pretty crafty striker, and Rodriguez, he does have a really nice jab, but he really needs to establish that to get the rest of his game going, and I feel like he'd have a little difficulty against a very tricky and elusive striker in Li, and I felt that it'd just be a very 50-50 fight, which I think it did kind of play out that way. A lot of people saying robbery, but I did think that first round was very, very close. Second round was definitely Li. Third round was Rodriguez. And I do think that first round was close enough. You could have scored it either way. So, not going to hate on the outcome too much. Don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I do think it was a close enough fight that, I don't think it was a robbery. But I was very surprised with the live odds because I think end of the second round, Li was like minus 600, and then midway through the third, he was like minus 2,000 or something. So not sure what they were seeing there. I mean, it did seem like a close enough fight that they could have swung the other way. But solid performance by Li there. Not a terrible bet in my opinion. I think Li at pretty decent dog odds was the side there. But moving along, Khamzat Chimaev versus Kevin Holland. Pretty crazy fight for as long as it lasted. Chimaev got after it quick and was a little surprised with how aggressively he was attacking the ground and pound and the submissions. Holland was scrambling around in there for a little bit, but ultimately succumbed to the grappling of Chimaev, just showing just way more physicality and strength in there. Would have been very interesting to see this fight get extended. Had Holland have been able to make it past that first round, I feel like Chimaev would have put himself in a very sticky situation. He was looking like he was going, pretty hard for the sub early, and I don't think he would have looked real hot, past that first round had he have not found the finish. But obviously he did. But Yeah, it would have been really interesting if he didn't. Anyways, gonna take this right into the main event. Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson. I had no idea how this fight was going to play out. I was leaning the Ferguson side, but, he was at chalk, and he had gone up to, I think, like minus 150, minus 160, and even higher at some point, and, I just didn't really trust Ferguson too much at this point to be laying the chalk on him. Didn't have the balls to play Diaz either, so I just stayed away, and, I guess it was an okay fight. Ferguson definitely looked kind of gun-shy in there. He didn't commit too much to a lot of his strikes, and it felt like Diaz was able to land some of the more effective strikes, outside of the leg kicks, but it did look like Tony was maybe a little afraid of getting hit at that spot, which, I can't blame him. The guy's taking a ton of damage, and he's coming off of a nasty knockout, but, man, I don't know how he's going to look going forward, because this is not a very encouraging sign. But overall, still a somewhat entertaining fight. Definitely a bit of fan service going on, right? It kind of felt like a late season of a TV show where, a lot of the main characters end up just being caricatures of themselves, and they kind of jump the shark a bit, right? Between Nate Diaz just kind of looked like he was waving off the fight, and Tony Ferguson just flopping to the ground. Just a very, very weird fight. Not the most entertaining fight ever, but it wasn't terrible. I still felt it would have been a lot better than the original matchup between Chimaev and Diaz. Seeing as how Chimaev just ran through Holland, it would have been a pretty sad night for Ferguson there, or for Diaz, and probably a sad night for Ferguson too. Seeing how he reacted to some of the shots of Diaz, couldn't imagine him taking the shots that Gillian would have thrown. So overall, not a bad event or anything, but probably not the most pay-per-view worthy card either. Anyways, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next week.